I want to talk to you about why the things in the box eventually come out. It's one thing to say if it's in the box, it comes out, just like the motorcycle parts. The question is why. And we've kind of touched on it. It's because of the thoughts, emotions, actions, and results. Those four things result in your expectations and ideas in the box eventually coming out. Here's what happens. When you have a thought, any thought, it sends an electrical impulse across your brain into a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. When the hypothalamus gets the impulse from the thought, it secretes a chemical that triggers the emotion. So the emotion is a direct chemical reflection of the thought. In other words, if you have a very happy and loving thought, your brain will start to produce endorphins and dopamine, and you'll have a happy, warm emotion. If you get very frightened, your brain will produce epinephrine and adrenaline, and you'll have a very frightened emotion. So the emotions are not random. The emotions are simply a reflection chemically in your brain from your thoughts. Once you feel the emotion, it drives you to take some action. So, for example, I walk into a room and I see my wife, and I have a very warm and loving emotion that there's my wife. All of a sudden, dopamine kicks off. I feel warm and loving. What actions do I take? I walk across the room and I give her a big hug. What's the result? I perpetuate that loving relationship. On the other hand, I can have a frightened thought, and the adrenaline kicks in, and my actions could be fight or flight, right? So this cycle happens over and over. You have a thought, triggers the emotion, triggers the action, the behavior, which triggers the results. Here's the catch. Your emotions and your actions are a direct reflection of your thoughts, even if your thought is wrong or inaccurate. In other words, you can actually think something that's not true and produce very real emotions, very real actions, and very real results. Happens all the time. We call it the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Imagine this scenario. You're walking out of the theater late at night, you've got your spouse and your kids, you're walking across the parking lot. As you walk across the parking lot, some guy comes running around the corner, and he's running at you and your family. He's covered in blood, he's got a knife in his hand, and he's coming at you and your family like he intends to do you some harm. Instantaneously, your brain starts thinking, danger, danger, right? Protect my family. Within a nanosecond, the adrenaline is coursing through your veins, right? You're feeling this adrenaline, this emotion, this heightened emotion. What actions do you take? You got to fight or flee. Well, you can't flee because you got your kids, so you step into the guy to fight him. He comes towards you, you clock him, drop him like a sack of potatoes, guys on the floor, guys on the ground, you protect your family. That's the result. The thought triggered the emotions, the action, the result. Just like it's supposed to work, right? Thoughts triggered everything, results for the final product. Until the police get there. When the police get there and the guy regains consciousness, because you clocked him pretty good, when he regains consciousness, you find out he was no threat to you whatsoever. You misinterpreted the situation. He was just a kid. The knife was fake. The blood was fake. He was running across the parking lot to meet some friends to go to a Halloween party. You assaulted a perfectly innocent teenager. Now, the fact that your thought was wrong, 100% wrong and inaccurate, how real were the emotions that you felt? How real were the actions that you took? How real was his broken jaw? You see, this happens in life all the time. We believe something that's not true, but it produces very true emotions, very real actions, and very permanent results, right? You can't unring that bell. So you got to make sure your thoughts are consistent and they're accurate. You got to make sure you're seeing things from an objective reality. There was a very famous case about 10 or 12 years ago. Two high school girls, they walk out of school, get in a car together, and they leave high school, and they get in a horrible crash. This is a true story. Horrible crash. So horrific was the crash that first responders could not tell which girl was which. They were BFFs. They had similar hair, body type, and clothing. They had two IDs. They couldn't tell which girl was which. To make matters worse, one of the young ladies died. So one girl went off to the hospital. One girl went off to the morgue. One family went off to the hospital. One family went off to the morgue to plan a funeral for their teenage daughter. Very different emotions, very different actions. About 5 weeks after the funeral of the girl that passed away, the girl in the hospital regains consciousness. When she regains consciousness and begins to speak, her family realizes, this is not our daughter. They had made a horrible mistake, which meant their daughter had been buried 5 weeks earlier. The other family got a call saying, hey, your daughter's alive in the hospital. Total mistake. But ask yourself this simple question. During those 5 weeks, were the emotions and the actions of each family based on what was true or what they thought was true? Of course, it was what they thought was true. You see, you can believe something that's wrong, and if you believe it, it will drive the emotions and actions as if it's true. So we have to be very, very careful because our thoughts are so powerful. Listen, Einstein said that you cannot fix a problem at the same level of thinking that created the problem. It makes sense, right? If I got a money problem, I can't solve that problem at the same level of thinking that I used to create that problem. If I got a sales problem and I created that sales problem with my thinking, what are the odds that my thinking is going to fix the problem? If I got a relationship problem, my thinking won't fix the relationship problem. My thinking created the relationship problem. So Einstein was right. You can't fix a problem at the same level of thinking that created the problem. It makes perfect sense, right? Here's the thing. You have to look at the entire picture. Human beings, we try to do these things backwards. We look at the results first and try to drive this whole process backwards. In other words, it's January 1st, and we want a new health and fitness result. We're going to lose 10 pounds and go to the gym. So if I want new results, I got to have new health and fitness actions. So I say, okay, I'm going to the gym and I'm going to eat better. And then we stop in midstream. And we're trying to pull new health and fitness results and new health and fitness actions out of a box of old thoughts and emotions about health and nutrition. And eventually, we're back on the couch eating the pizza. The reality is you have to get clear on your thoughts because they drive everything. Here's an important lesson, probably one of the most single important lessons I ever learned. If you want temporary change in your life, temporary change in your income, temporary change in your sales, temporary change in your relationships or your health, focus on your actions. Because temporary actions will give you temporary results. But if you want permanent change in those areas, you have to focus on the thought. Listen, what do you think the first thing I said to myself when the first 2 times I got out of prison? What do you think I said? What's the first thing I said? Never going back to that place, right? Because I knew I wanted the new result. I didn't like jail, right? I knew I wanted the new result, which meant I needed new actions. I needed to start going to work, paying my bills, stop lying, stop cheating. But I didn't change the box. So I stopped halfway, and eventually my thoughts and emotions about work and those things kind of gave way, and eventually I went right back to where I started, right? Now, this last time when I got out, I changed the foundation. I changed the core of the box. And of course, everything changed after that. So again, if you want temporary change, focus on your actions. If you want permanent change, you have to focus on your thoughts. You got to make sure that the things that you're thinking are consistent with the things you want today. You have to make sure they're accurate. You have to make sure that they're going to produce the results that you want, because you can believe something that's not true and you can make it true. For example, in sales, if you think your customers only care about a cheap price, congratulations, you're right. If you think your customers don't care about value, that's your basic thought. What emotions come from that on a sales call? Here we go again. Another cheap customer, right? We're down, we're depressed, we're wearing that body language. What actions do we engage in? Do we go in with a dynamic value-based sales presentation? Of course not. We just go in, try to offer a cheap price, and guess what? People buy cheap price from us. Guy walks out and says, I knew it. I knew they didn't care. But you take another person, right? Their thought goes like this. I understand money's tight, but people want quality and service. It's up to me to deliver quality and service and to communicate to my customers why quality and service matters and why we're worth more money. What emotion comes from that thought, right? I'm 10 feet tall, I'm bulletproof, it's showtime when I go on a sales lead. What actions come from that? Well, I go through a value-based dynamic sales presentation. I show my customer why I'm better, why I'm worth more money. What's the result? They end up paying me more money. Funny thing is, that guy walks out saying the same thing as the other guy. I knew it. You see, we are all products of our expectations, because our expectations, the thoughts, which are the contents of your box, the expectations drive everything else. This is why your mother always said, be careful what you wish for. You see, we've known this stuff for years. So get clear on your thoughts. Understand that if you want temporary change, you can focus on your actions. But if you want permanent change, you have to focus on the thoughts, because the thoughts trigger everything else that happens in your life. Well, folks, we've covered a lot of information and a lot of introductory concepts that are going to help you as you go through the upside of fear. As we go into the process of really examining what's in your box, how did it get there? Is it consistent with what I want today? In the fear process, you're going to get focused on the things you want in life, your relationships, your money, all the things that you want. We're going to learn how to get deeply emotionally committed to those things and take consistent action to reach that. So the introductory concepts, you should have them in place. You should have mastered them. Next, we're going to go into the upside of fear and start the process of redescribing, rescripting, redesigning what's in your box.